Hey guys, just an important preamble to this week's podcast episode with a very important guest, Hugh McCutcheon. That name may sound familiar to many of you volleyball fans out there. If you are going to watch any episode of Volleyballology Uncensored, we hope it's this one because Hugh McCutcheon is not only a legendary coach and player. He played for the national team of New Zealand before coming back to the United States playing collegiate ball because he had some years of eligibility here. He went on to coach the U.S. men's national team where he was able to capture a gold medal as a coach in 2008 in the Beijing Olympics against great odds, and they were not a favorite team to win, so it was quite an accomplishment. He later won the silver medal with the women's national team. Very rare for a coach to do that. Only coach in U.S. Olympic history, volleyball history, to do that. Only 3 coaches ever who have transitioned to do both teams, and they captured the silver medal in the 2012 London Olympics. So, but more importantly, Hugh McCutcheon over the past few years has, because of his kids' involvement in youth sports, felt that something needed to be done with regards to coaching. Now, this is where our paths crossed. Volleyballology, as you may or may not know, our mission is to really help improve youth coaching in the world, or around the United States, Canada, and Europe. We feel that there's a gap between what high-level players and coaches do or believe or behave and what's happening at the youth levels. And Hugh McCutcheon has that same message for coaches, and he's hoping that he can, in his latest book, which we talk about on the episodes, called Championship Behaviors. We really recommend that every parent, player, coach get a copy of this book. We're not, being paid to say this, but Hugh's book, it uses real rigor and real research to have coaches understand, especially the value of sport, what it's really for, and how to get the most out of your players anyway. A lot of times people think that winning has to be cutthroat cold, and Hugh makes a good point, the research, psychological research and behavior research, that that's actually not the case. And then he also brings his own experience as a coach to the table without telling coaches what they should do or shouldn't do. He just basically presents a lot of information through his vast knowledge and experience. And most interestingly for us, before we send you into this episode, is Hugh recently decided to step away from his coaching duties. He's the head coach of the University of Minnesota. And the idea was that he was going to pursue a more holistic approach for all coaches at the University of Minnesota. So his book, and writing this book about, again, called Championship Behaviors, it really caught the eye of the athletic director at the school, and they wanted to create a position where Hugh could not just help volleyball coaches, but coaches in general. Again, Hugh's children got involved in youth sports, and that's where he noticed, like myself personally, the difference between the mindset of a lot of club and youth sport coaches. So we hope you enjoy this episode. It really means a lot to us. And please, if you do watch this episode, can you please do us a huge favor and subscribe to our channel? It actually means a lot to the people that help us put this show on, and it also helps us improve the guest quality, because we are, talking with some big names in the sport, and we really want to hear their voices and help, have their voices help us on our mission to improve volleyball for everybody, for coaches, players, and parents. So please hit that subscribe button. It would mean the world to us. And please, with no further ado, please enjoy this episode with Mr. Hugh McCutcheon.
What's the big idea?
So again, I just want to say, Hugh, that we started this project, Volleyballology, in 2022. Just about 7 months ago, it feels, maybe coming up on a year.
It
actually
is getting close.
Yeah, but anyway, and when we saw you in terms of what you were doing, I saw your TEDx talk in Fargo, and I was like, it just hit me right to the core, because it's the same thing that I saw. It's the same sort of journey. I mean, my I played professionally, not anywhere near your level. A coach, not anywhere near your level. But then my children went into club sports, and we saw a couple coaches, and I thought, okay, maybe it's just some individuals, and the parents and the mindset of that world. And then when I saw your TED talk, I was like, that it just aligned so perfectly with why we started this project. And I think that your book further, like when I got your book, I was like, man, everything you say in that book, we're just nodding our heads. It's like, and we're like, thank God, but we're so grateful that you, as a prominent voice, had the. It really is courage to say and address these things, because that's one of the things we found with people who commented on things we were doing and people who reached out to us, that they couldn't say the things that you were saying or we were saying, because they're working in the trenches with people, right?
Right.
So just
I'm glad it resonated. I'm not sure if I was trying to be courageous. I just wanted to be a voice of reason in amongst all of this, given, as I said, there's such a lack of academic rigor around coaching as a profession, or even guidelines about how that should work. And given that it's so tradition-based, I thought being able to reconcile some of the spaces around what the research is in this area of achievement and best practice and how that applies to the day-to-day. And what we know, or what we find, is that it's scalable and transferable to any level. And so, like you, I was seeing, questionable coaching practices at all levels. And so I thought maybe there's a chance to fill that space with some best practice knowledge versus some opinions,
Mm-hmm. And did you see that? Like, how far up did you see those issues? I know the transition you had to Minnesota after your national team. I mean, I think the issue is people really confuse national team and professional sports with what they're doing in their local club, even all the way up to their colleges. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
I think it's absolutely fair. And again, to that idea that that somehow coaching is the X's and O's, that's a small part of what we do, and teaching should be the majority of it. And if we're in youth sport, then it should be almost all of it. So to that end, we watch the NBA finals and see some great play that they drew up, and we try to apply that to our 12 and under basketball team. Well, it's probably not going to work out great. But we think we're coaching because we're like, well, we just saw, that Miami Heat do it. So, that clearly must be what's required. But oftentimes it's not.
Could we like just point out the difference between like coaching and teaching? Like, even I think I get it, like, but even for anyone watching who may not
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to me the coaching piece is the X's and O's. It's substitutions and timeouts and game planning and strategy, some of that stuff. That stuff's kind of at the end of your week. That's what you're doing on the weekend. But for the other 5 days, you should be in there teaching, where teaching is not just skill acquisition, trying to improve the fundamentals and all of that, but it might also be system acquisition, and it should be application of both of those two things. And I think, again, when I was going through this process, that idea that skill acquisition and skill application are connected, but oftentimes we get wrapped up just in skill acquisition. We don't really spend enough time working on the application of it, was another element to the book that I really wanted to add or reconcile for people.
Yeah, and I mean, just getting to the book, I mean, Championship Behaviors, it's so impressive and so thorough in all the categories it hits. Like, I was like, when I was reading it, I was so impressed with the amount of work. Can you talk a little bit about the process and like how long did it take you to pull this together? Because I don't think I've read anything. I mean, especially in the world of volleyball, I love how it's it's basically transferable to all things. Like I'm a business owner too, and I taught for 20 years, and I found it transferable to all walks of life. But I love the emphasis on volleyball. How long of a process did it take you to pull that together?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you liked it. It's a sports book, as you said. It just happens that my experiences were in volleyball, so it seemed, even though I draw from different sports, for examples throughout the book, a lot of the stuff that I could speak to directly was connected to my volleyball experiences. But I was interested in putting it together. I think over the years, people had had approached me at different times about possibly putting a book together, and every time they would talk to me, I was, that's
cool.
great, flattered, but I was like,
Yeah.
well, I don't even know what I'm going to write about.
Yeah.
But as time went on, and certainly, we were speaking to these experiences through youth sport and our children, but also just learning more and seeing more from all the different lenses that I've had the privilege of seeing our sport through, international men and international women, collegiate men, collegiate women, professional men, and seeing that there was, at least in my experience, there were a lot of guiding principles that were the same with all of these different campaigns, with all of these different teams. Their application was quite different based on the different groups. But because of coaching all these different groups and having similar levels of outcome success, it felt like there was some stuff there, that there was some transfer and some applicability to sport in general, not just to volleyball. I think had I just coached one team for 27 years and had success, I mean, that's great. And maybe there's a story there, but it's hard to say that whatever we were doing in one place for a long time would be transferable to another. But because I'd had the chance to bounce around and work with all these different teams, it felt like I was on to something. So in addition, I got to work with some really great people along the way. And unfortunately, many of them are no longer with us. But there felt like there was some legacy elements to it in terms of trying to honor their work and the way that we had talked about applying it. So, for example, Anders Eriksson,
Right, I was going to say.
in deliberate practice, Ken Ravizza in the sports psych space, Carl McGowan in the motor learning space. All giants in their field and no longer with us. And I had truly the privilege of spending significant amounts of time working with them and looking at how their areas of expertise applied to what we were doing. So it felt like I felt obliged to kind of pay that forward,
Yeah, and you were fortunate to have them in like practice session. Like you had your clipboard out and doing studies, and I mean, what a privilege that was for you.
We were able to get Anders to come to Minnesota a couple of times, and he stayed here at the house, and we hung out and
That's so cool.
talked. And, sport was not his wheelhouse.
No way.
No, but people.
But he really enjoyed the academic pursuit, and the question that I would continually discuss with him was around the ways that deliberate practice as a construct, not as an idea, but the construct that he describes in his research, how that applies to the more complicated skills and systems that we find in sport, because all of his research was in very controlled environments such as mathematics or music or memorization, where the relationship between the amount of work and the return in terms of outcome was very linear. If I work hard playing the violin, I get better, and therefore I feel better because I'm a better violinist. In volleyball, I might show up at practice first and leave last every day, and it doesn't mean I'm going to play. It doesn't mean I'm going to win. It doesn't guarantee anything. So that relationship was more nebulous, and so being able to talk about how to build cultures and systems that supported the amount of work that deliberate practice requires was a big part of all of those conversations.
Yeah, and so like, if you were to, would you say that this work, like how long was it between the initiation of the book to the completion?
Right. Yes. Sorry.
No. That's
sorry.
That's
okay. On a bit of a
you know what? You
tangent
talk about whatever you want, Hugh.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, so we put together a proposal, and that was accepted. It was a good framework. It had some good bones, but just due to the nature of collegiate coaching, and at the time, in 2021, we were still in the throes of COVID, and we ended up having back-to-back seasons that year. So I think our fall season of 2020 got pushed into the winter. Then we went again in the fall, and then in between we had recruiting and camp, and so I had this proposal kind of squared away, and a contract to okay, we're going to write a book, great, but it ended up that the window that I was afforded was kind of this 2-month chunk.
Oh wow!
From about the middle of January till the middle of March, and like I said, I had good bones, but it was very intense. So, every morning I was getting up at 5 a.m. and I'd sit here with my cup of coffee and have a crack at it.
Wow.
And I'm not sure, I don't say that other than like, that's how it went down. But I think the thing that was quite cool about it was so intense. And when I pushed send, like I had to get it to them on the 15th of March. And I kid you not, I pushed send at 6 p.m. on the 14th.
Oh boy.
But I was so sick of it,
yes.
I didn't even want to look at the thing.
Right.
But it also, because it was so intense, there were all these really cool connections, and it was very creative and uncomfortable and all of that stuff. But it was this really kind of rich couple of months, 60 days or whatever it was. And then I pushed send, and it ended up being pretty good, and we didn't have to edit it too much. We didn't have to do much to it. So
awesome.
Oh wow!
So,
Wow!
Worked out great.
It's funny because I bet you applied a lot of the principles as you were writing this book. You were probably like, well, I could go back and fix this. I could go back and fix that. Right? Like you had to put your. I mean, you already had that obviously based on your resume and what you've done and experiences. You said varied. But did you have any, like after sending it, was there ever this hesitation? Like, I can almost imagine, I get that way before I send an email, let alone.
Yeah, no. So I pushed send, and like I said, I was sick of it.
You're right.
And I would say 6 weeks later, we were traveling to play a spring game down in Iowa. And I do a little bit of speaking to some companies and corporations and stuff, and I had an engagement in May, and this was towards the end of April. It would have been one of our last spring matches, and so I knew this was coming up, and I had a 4-hour bus trip. So I was like, well, maybe I should crack it open and have a look, and get ready for this speaking thing. So anyway, I opened it up and I gave it a read, and then at the end, I was like, you know what? That's not too bad. I stand by that. So,
that's good.
So to me, that was the ultimate litmus test, right there.
Well, so many. I mean, it's funny because so many authors, like you mentioned this in your book too, and I think Malcolm Gladwell talks about it too, like the 10,000 hours thing that he kind of now revisits and looks back on and says, like,
as he should,
as we all should, right? And I think that's sort of interesting, because what you just said, like looking back on your work and seeing if you still stood by it, it's sort of connected to coaching and this practice of reflection that is sadly uncommon. Like I remember in my teacher's college training, I remember the idea of reflection was built into everything, and getting students to reflect, or having teachers reflect, and in the profession. So I did it for 20 years. I was able to leave it because of my volleyball business after 20 years, and I found that the reflection was less common now than when I started in teaching. And I think that speaks to some things happening societally here. Do you find? Oh,
no doubt.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I would agree. And and I make this connection in the book. I think one of the tools that people use for reflection now is this idea of journaling, which has become quite popular. But whether you like to write or whether you don't, I'm not sure it matters, but taking time to reflect, yes, I think is a really important part of the process. Yeah.
And I think you allude to this a lot in the book too. And we've talked about this on the show. I think one of the biggest problems, I think, going back to coaches, and we also try to bring parents into what we're doing here a lot, because I noticed that in the club world too, where the parents are so influential in what their kids are expecting or dreaming about, or just their relationship to sport, is so affected by those parents. So we really are trying to get parents involved in this process as well. But do you think that is it very difficult to get people to adopt or open up their minds? Like, you talked about fixed mindset, growth mindset. Do you ever feel that when you're doing these sorts of papers or books and research, that the people reading it are already of the mindset because they're the ones
Right.
who will open up the book.
Are you preaching to the choir?
Or, yeah, you're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
And
Well,
how do we battle that, I guess, is the...
Yeah. Well, I hope that's not the case. Although I understand that probably in terms of the word of mouth side of things, it would probably tend to be more popular with like-minded people, or at least open-minded people.
What I'm asking, Hugh, I'm asking, can you turn this into a TikTok? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, but where I was going with it, though, is I think because so much of coaching, or so much of all of this, even we talk a little bit about the whole sport industrial complex. So much of it is based in tradition. And I was just trying to apply some reason and some logic to it all. And here's the research, and here's how you can use it. So even if it gives people tools to have informed conversations around what's going on, I think that's a win. I mean, whether the people read the book or don't read the book,
right?
Okay. But if you read it and you're like, hey, this affords me a segue into a conversation with someone that maybe isn't principally aligned, but they might at least be open to hearing about this,
right?
Because again, it's not necessarily this idea of like, hey, right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, if you really want to be good at this idea of teaching and coaching, this is it. I mean, as in like, here are the principles that should be driving a lot of your methods. It's not supposed to be the definitive work, but at least here's a construct that from the inception of your goal to the moment of achievement, you can have guiding principles through that whole process, versus feeling like you've got to, make it up as you go along, or do it the way you did it when you were an athlete, which, might be right, but it also, maybe it's been 10 or 15 years and there's a lot of best practice research you could be applying. So it's about finding effective and efficient methods to help you achieve the things you want to achieve anyway.
Mm-hmm. And you do a great job of separating that, like understanding that I'm not telling you what to do, or this is not a sermon here. This is, but here's what I've done. Here's my journey. And then I think the other amazing thing you do is, that's why I can't believe you did this in 2 months. How did you get those interviews with all of your former players?
Yeah.
And that was...
The interviews are
well,
awesome.
And I front loaded that over the course of the year prior to. So the interviews were, we had to clean them up a little bit. We had the interviews recorded and we had transcripts.
Oh, okay. So that was like
So it was more like editing and making sure it was all
Gotcha.
clean.
I was gonna say, wow.
Yeah. So that was a cleanup. But I'm glad you liked that. I thought that was really important because, again, even though I'm writing it, I didn't want it to be a book about like, hey, here's, this time we went and played Brazil down in Porto Alegre or whatever, and here's this great anecdote. I mean, no one really cares about that, right? I mean, what I wanted to talk about was, hey, here's the research, here's the science of achievement. It's not too ethereal or it's too scary. It's based in logic and it's based in scientific rigor. But more importantly, here's how it applies as from my perspective as the coach, and then being able to add like, hey, here's how it was received by the athlete. I thought that was an important part of it because, again, I'm writing it not just for coaches, but also for athletes and like you're talking to, for parents of athletes.
Yep. No, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's, again, we'll mention it throughout, but I highly recommend, I know we don't want to make this too pluggy, I know, but championship behaviors. I mean, I highly recommend that because we were talking about putting together stuff for parents, coaches, and players as well. And then once we read your book, we were like, well, forget that because it's already been done. It's it's really
it's very kind.
No, it hits on so many things, and I think that every group of the volleyball community and outside the volleyball community. I mean, you said you do speaking engagements and things too. This totally has corporate, and it's just like you said. It's wonderfully named championship behaviors, and it's not like volleyball behaviors. It really is the metaphor for life and all things high achieving. And Eric,
well, we talk about like confidence building a lot and how important that is for kids nowadays. And then you had just a short little like interview, I'm sure you chopped it down, like with Sarah Wilhite, and there's a great little story of how when she was first on your team, like not like athletically skilled, but not super confident, and just how, it was again a short little story, just showing how her confidence grew with your practice methods, and just kind of, I forget, there was one point where you're asking, where she answered one of your questions, and then you said you were down 2 sets against the first seeded team. And then she said, normally in the past, she would have thought, oh, like we're done for now. But then after the second set, you guys went back to your team huddle, and you just said, hey, let's just play our game and get back to what we do. And then she said in her mind, she's like, yeah, it clicked for me. And she said, yes, we can do this. I can do this. We're going to go do the things that like we've been practicing. And then sure enough, it sounded like you went on to beat that team. I forget which team it was, but it was really, and again, short little part of the book, but like I got to see this transformation of an athlete into like a confident individual. So that was all the interviews were great in the book.
No, Sarah in particular is, I mean, I agree. The amount of honesty and vulnerability that all of those athletes were able to share in those interviews and were comfortable sharing, I was really humbled by. But with Sarah in particular, because it was a struggle, and yet that transformation was so significant in terms of her ability to play the game. And she's still out there battling. I think her team in Japan won the V League this year, and she's still out there doing it. So it's a phenomenal story. And to your point, that match that she references, I think all of us at some point have been in a situation where it seems daunting or it seems overwhelming. And our natural human tendency, of course, is negative bias. So we tend to amplify the negative and maybe even project into the future our expectation or our belief about what might happen or may not happen, when the reality, of course, is that the future is undetermined. So finding ways to help people be here, be in the now, versus worrying too much about the last play or too much about the next one is really important.
I love that point too, because I wanted to bring it up. Like, there's a couple of things there. Like, your relationship with your players is like so, like it just to a T defines the mentor-mentee sort of relationship that you think coaches need to start to develop. And I often wondered when I was reading the book, like, it would be nice to just change the word, right? Volleyball mentor, because that would probably ward off people going into it for the wrong reasons. Until we put it in a movie and the mentor screaming at people anyway. But Hollywood, eh? I think there's something
you can't handle the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Do you think there's a big cultural component? Because I think we're sitting here as a couple of Canadians. You're New Zealand-born Kiwi through and through, I imagine. And do you think there's something there? Because I know when we started this project and we started putting out ideas very similar to yours without even knowing that you had started this. So we arrived at the same conclusions without even talking to each other. And I'm sure there's other people at our levels who have. Do you think the pushback is coming from a place like, is it a cultural thing? Do you think that you do mention the capital of capitalism in the United States and coaching and that there's a lot of pushback, right? About being the best. Like a friend of ours, I don't know, he's a high level young coach from Canada. He went down to coach at a club in the States. That's a private club. And he's been telling me like, wow, like we thought we were competitive. Wow.
Yeah.
Did you
it's a little bit different. Well, first of all, the idea of doing it in a best practice way with best intention and all of that, and winning, those things are not mutually exclusive.
Yes.
So I think that's really important. In fact, the things that we're describing in the book are designed to give you the best possible chance of achieving the outcome that you hope to achieve. Mm-hmm. But what we all need to recognize is that there are lots of elements in the competitive equation that we can control, and there's lots that we can't. So it's really about focusing on, hey, here's the things that we can do, here's the things that we can control, and these are really easy to say, but it turns out it's really difficult to do, and giving people structure and methods that afford them the chance to get the most out of every second they've got. That's what we're really speaking to. And so this notion of competition, I think, is, if you'll afford me the chance to go off on a bit of a tangent, I think this notion of competition is quite misunderstood, or at least, I don't know, misunderstood. How about we just say this? I think we've got it a little bit wrong in that, if you look at the root of the word to compete, the Latin, and not to make all your listeners fall asleep, but
no,
it
hey,
says
we
to
do it
strive
every
with,
week.
right? To strive with. It's not to strive against.
Right.
And so the way we commonly, or within our cultural narrative of today and the life of comparison, the way we choose to see competition is kind of this binary all or nothing endeavor, where you win, you get everything, all the resources, I lose, I get nothing. I'm not worthy, I'm a loser kind of thing. And there's a couple of issues I have with that. First of all, I think competition is a really healthy and important thing, but because we see it as this all or nothing, and even worse, if we lose, we feel embarrassed or insufficient, or somehow, that we're not very good, and we have these bad feelings about ourselves, and then we don't even, maybe we don't compete very much anymore because we just don't want to have that feeling of insufficiency, or whatever we're going to call it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's that part of it that's an issue. So because we see it as an all or nothing, when people lose, they're less inclined to continue to compete. But I want to tell people, and I think this is the reality, that competition is actually a really important part of learning. And there's this social element in competition relative to this idea within the root of the word, to strive with, where your opponent actually can draw out performances from you that you can't generate yourself, at least initially. Maybe later in life you can do that. But there was this study done by a guy in somewhere in New York, I think New York Stern University. He was looking at runners, and in these long distance running events, when a particular athlete's rival was competing in the same event, these people were running 5 seconds per kilometer faster than they would have in other races. So that's about 8 seconds per mile for our US listeners. But that's a significant shift in performance. And this was like over 6 years, over 1,000 runners. It wasn't like, 3 people that he just watched on a Friday.
Yeah.
Right.
There was some rigor to this study. And so I think, great, the idea that competition is an important part of it, but it's not the achievement. It's about a life of achievement. And competition is a great pathway for that to happen, to continue to learn and improve, to get better. But we seldom think of competition as a learning opportunity.
Exactly.
We tend to think of it as a defining opportunity.
Yeah, and do you think...
I love hearing this.
Yeah, it's so good, right?
I feel the negatives of that right now. Like, I'm an older athlete getting back into competition, and so I'm like on the fringe of decent competition, but I'm getting my butt kicked.
Yeah.
And for sure, I just came off of a loss this past weekend, and it does hurt. And I do feel, especially with the whole physical body, having to work so hard to keep it going, that sometimes I want to just be like, why do I keep playing? But also I just love being in that environment. So I'm just trying to not let that negative take over, because then it'll just drag me out of the sport. Right?
And Hugh, Eric's 36, so do you want to tell him to shut up, or should I? About his physical body.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, if you're struggling now, hang on.
Wait till you have to go upstairs with groceries.
Might be a good opportunity to reframe it. Yeah. Well, and maybe even if we took that concept a little further, so how do I feel about competition? Again, I think everyone's thinking it's all or nothing, and I'm saying, hey, it's a chance to learn and get better. Maybe the ultimate expression of this ends up being like, hey, can I compete with myself? If running with someone, like, I don't know if you've ever been on a run and there's someone ahead of you in the distance and you think you can catch them up, you go a little quicker, or you're going for a jog and someone blows by you and you're like, all of a sudden you go a little faster, right? I mean, that's a real thing. But if you can learn to draw that out from yourself, or to do that, I think that's got to be the ultimate form of
it's got
living a good life, where like, hey, I'm trying to get a little bit better tomorrow. And again, if you'll humor me, what I would suggest is that whether you like it or not, we're all competing, and what we're competing against is time. We this whole idea that we're supposed to give away our todays for a better tomorrow. Well, we're not guaranteed that tomorrow. We're not entitled to that tomorrow.
Right.
So we want to have a good tomorrow. Let's have a good today. And maybe this idea of competing, or at least, hey, can I be little bit better today than I was before? Maybe that's the way to make sure that whenever you get to the finish line, and we never know when that's going to come, but maybe when you get to the finish line, when you take your last breath, you're like, hey, I lived a good life. I got after it. I did the best I could with what I had, and away we go.
Well, and to your point too, Hugh, and earlier that story that Eric was talking about from your book, you do a wonderful job, I think, with athletes, and I think the best coaches do this, of removing the variables, the variables that are not within our control. So the understanding that you can lose this game to a team that's far superior to you. You can lose this match. The only thing you really can control is you. And I think that also goes back to why we talked about you writing this book. You weren't out to change the world. You were out to tell your version of what you think and provide as much information and evidence.
Yeah, here's my experience.
And then you can sleep at night, right? Because you've done your part. In control. You're in charge of you and your message, and that's all you can worry about, right?
Yeah. Well, and also what I was finding was that there was so much almost mysticism around coaching methods and what it was, and like somehow there was this magic to it, and yet the only magic is hard work and smart work, and that's what it's about. So just again, this idea of trying to be a voice of reason in this thing that seems to have gotten a little bit clunky. That was really it.
Clunky, commercialized. We actually, Eric and I was messaging Eric this week because we've been doing this now for, I think we're 43 episodes in now. And I said to Eric, like, are we becoming part of this machine? Like, are we now another voice online telling everybody how to be better? And I mean, we're trying to come at it from the right mindset, like very much in line with what you're talking about. And we aren't, really commercializing it. Sometimes I just worry that there's so much noise in the world that. But I guess we have to, like, the voices like yours have to speak up too. What is it? Jordan Peterson says that line about if we don't speak up, then you leave more room for. I don't want to say he uses the word tyrants, but he means in terms of you do leave more room, I guess, for the voices that. Well,
that's what I get after hearing Hugh talk about like what he thinks of competition. I hope you're going on, and I hope you're able to share your story just as you felt somewhat obligated to pass on the legacy of all those great academics that you worked with.
That's true.
I think to some degree that compelled you to write the book, perhaps. And so I can only hope that
it was part of it for sure. Yeah.
Like a responsibility almost, eh?
Yeah. I just hope you get to, keep talking and sharing your story with other people, other athletes, coaches, anyone really.
Idiots like us.
This is life. It transfers into life, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think the book resonated with a lot of people on a lot of levels, but one of the things that seemed to keep coming back was this idea of the subtitle for the book is a framework for competitive excellence in sport, and I think that idea of countering our popular understanding of what we think competition is with this idea of competitive excellence really seemed to resonate with people. So maybe there's something there.
Yeah, and do you think, Hugh, that there's definitely, I mean, we've seen this trajectory of sports kind of exploding or being really shifted off its path. Traditionally, we talk about this on the show quite a bit too, where sports used to produce a certain, it used to be a very honest meritocracy. And I always compare it with, because I've done business and sports, and I always saw those two areas as great sort of bastions of truth and honesty in the world. But in the last few years, we've seen sports not producing the same types of people as it did maybe 20, 30 years ago. And I know that's common to romanticize the past and all that, but do you think that, I mean, it has to be the social media, right? Like, I mean, in terms of that comparison culture for adults and kids, that is just getting those synapses going. And I just feel that the more people are on there, whether it's a young athlete, a parent, or a coach, the more toxic this comparison problem is happening, and this insecurity that's making them want to win now or live and die with every point. That is just like, I saw it when I was sitting there watching my kids play, and parents are coming up to me and saying, how are you watching this? Isn't this driving you crazy? And I was like, well, no, I was worse than them at this age. Like, I didn't have this system of organized club ball. And they were all like, they thought it was driving me crazy. It was driving them crazy because they had never been in the arena, and they didn't have that self-esteem, I guess, to understand that, no, failure is good. And this is all part of a long story here. So
anyone that's good at anything has made plenty of mistakes. And that's the reality.
Yeah, and that's why, we want to get more people like you that have had success, because that's what I find is the magic formula to success. And I've sort of lived it in some areas of my life, but especially people, and I look to people like, I'm sort of addicted to Shark Tank, Dragon's Den, those types of shows, because the mindset they have is very in keeping with the highest level coaches and athletes that I've played with and played for. And do you think this? I guess my question out of all that rant is, how do you think self-esteem, and you do allude to it in the book, is there a way to get that? How do parents, coaches, and players get their self-esteem high enough, whereas they can separate the end result from themselves?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, and if you can think of it, can you tell us so we can sell it?
No, yeah. Well, I've got a few thoughts. I don't know if we can string them together into something coherent, but the reality is that this life of comparison and the anxiety and all the stuff that's going on. I mean, that is, some of that is kid to kid, athlete to athlete, but I also think parents need to be really conscious of the impressions that they're making on their children. I think oftentimes the parents' anxiety is being pushed onto the child as much as there is between the children. I think parenting is a wonderful, difficult, challenging, awesome in every sense of the word endeavor. But the reality, of course, is that these children are people. It's their journey, their deal. Our job is to help them to navigate all the inevitable pitfalls as best we can, but we cannot and we should not protect them from all of the frailties of the human condition. The reality is this: if we never let our children get into trouble, they'll never learn how to get out of it.
Exactly.
And so we have to accept that there's some risk in all of that. I'm not talking about neglectful parenting. I'm talking about worrying about being a kid's parent, not their best friend, right? You want to be the best parent you can be. Let them find their own friends and be best friends with their peers, not their parents, because I think that complicates things, but maybe that's a different deal. The other thing, part of that, is that our children are, again, that their deal, we're trying to do the best we can, but oftentimes I think parents feel like if a kid screws up, that somehow that's a reflection on them. Now, I understand under certain conditions that may be the case, but these children are not there to offer reflected glory for their parents to bask in. The children are there to do the best they can. And because again, sometimes the parenting gets overly involved, and I would say overly emotionally invested, making it about the parent versus maybe making it about the kid. What tends to happen is the kid ends up really not understanding clearly, or maybe getting a blurred understanding of what it is, what that parent-child relationship is based on. You know, in the book, one of the things I talk about is like, hey, if you know, we're watching my 8 and under basketball and little Timmy scores a bucket and his parents cheer and celebrate him scoring, and then he doesn't score, and then they, you know, look at the ground, or they do something demonstrative and,
every
you know,
day,
throw their hands up in the air or
yep.
whatever. So, mom and dad love it when I score, but he's 7 years old or 8 years old. He doesn't know the difference between they love me because I scored a bucket, or they love me because they love me. You know, and that's where you can get some super strange codependency weirdness that goes on where, the kid's now doing it for parental affection or parental acknowledgement or acceptance. And the reality, as you both can speak to, being good at anything is really challenging. And you need your head and your heart and probably your gut, but it's got to be yours. It can't be someone else's. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing it for someone else, then at some point, there's resentment, there's burnout. It doesn't end well. So I don't know if we got any of that.
No, that was totally
figured out, but there's a few thoughts there.
Yeah. And we keep coming back to the point of self-care and maintenance among parents and coaches, because I think that the more you take care of yourself, the more mentally able you are to support others. If your house is not in order, then you're not going to be much of a mentor.
Well, and to your comment about self-esteem, as a parent, hopefully I can feel good about myself based on my actions and interactions versus waiting for my son or daughter to do something that makes me feel good about myself.
That's what we're talking
about. I mean, I can
about.
feel proud about their achievements or the homework assignment that they did well or whatever. Mm. But if I'm living through them to seek that validation or to get that recognition, then it's probably time for me to get a few hobbies myself or to find ways that I can feel validated for my actions versus trying to project that onto my children.
Well, and even the way you said, like I was a teacher for a long time, and the way you said, if they do well on a homework assignment or whatever, that means that you're teaching your kids not to be externally validated. Because part of the problem, even as a teacher, I used to teach philosophy, and I would tell the kids all the time, like, every time I give you back an assignment with some sort of, number or letter, it's sort of reinforcing the idea that you're externally validated for about 14 years of your life. Not a great system, right? So I do tell that. I'm sure you have that message with your kid. How old are your kids now, Hugh?
11 and 13.
That's what I thought. Yeah, 11. Because the first time I heard, so the reason I went to find your TEDx talk on YouTube, if people haven't seen it, they should watch it. What is it, like 16 minutes, Hugh?
13
minutes, 13 minutes. Mm-hmm. And the reason I found it was because I read an article saying you were stepping down from your position at Minnesota. Do you want to talk a little bit about that maybe? And
yeah, sure, happy to.
Just about what role and why, what role you're assuming at the university now? Right.
So I coached for a long time, and the goal for me always to try, and I emphasize the word try, that was to try to be number one dad, not number one coach. And what I was finding was that within the structures of college athletics, some of the times that had previously been a little more protected in terms of being off, not having to be a part of recruiting or transfers or whatever it is, running the program.
Right.
Those times were no longer there. And so over time you're thinking, well, geez, here's, our son's 13, in 5 years he's out the door. And it felt like maybe if I didn't look to pivot now, I never would. And I'm not saying that would have been necessarily bad or good, other than to say, personally, I would have felt like I wasn't honoring my commitment. I mean, it's a great job. Minnesota's a great volleyball program, and they're going to continue to be just fine. Not to worry. But I just felt for me, hey, I gotta, like I was saying, we're not entitled to those tomorrows. We're not guaranteed them. Right. So I just wanted to feel like I was a little more present for them in my todays. And the book ended up being this conduit to what I'm doing now, because last year it was coming out. It came out in November. But in the middle of the summer, I went to my athletics director, Mark Coyle, and was like, hey, Mark, just so you know, this is a thing and it's coming out. And he asked if I would talk him through it. And I did. We spent a few hours going through the book, and he was really impressed and was like, hey, we could really use this in the department. And then we started having discussions. Well, okay, what does that look like? And here we are. So currently I work as within the org chart, it's listed as an athletics director in charge of coach and sport development. But I think the best way to describe it would be more as internal consultant, I guess. I'm not here to tell coaches how to do their job. I'm just trying to help them to do their job. So it's more, like an advocate, a resource, maybe some mentoring with assistant coaches, some other bits and pieces like that.
Right.
I also do a little bit of work with some student athletes, present to different teams, but also helping different athletes with some of the perspective around performance and competition. And then working quite a bit with administration in terms of, they have strategic intent. So how do we implement that? How do we get that going? And so it's kind of this connector, I guess.
You've kind of created a new role, right?
It's been quite interesting, but really stimulating to be able to, especially based on the book, apply some of the stuff to these different sports. And the book has also afforded me some nice space between, like, hey, it's not me having had relative success as a coach coming in here telling you, like, hey, I used to do it this way, so this is the way you should do it. I can basically say, hey, here's the science, and
yes,
you get to decide, but here's some different ways of looking at it. So it gives me some really good objectivity in a space that could become quite subjective if I didn't have that.
Yeah, it's a mark of an innovator, right? I mean, like, the fact that your athletic director read this book and said, like, wow, we need you to affect more lives here.
Because that could have gone the other way, right? They could have not liked what you wrote and then kind of
sure.
Yeah,
and in a way, you're almost affecting, or arguably are affecting, more athletes and more sports, right? And that's
that's what I was hoping, is that perhaps I could have a greater sphere of influence, because I believe strongly in the messaging. I think it's important, but within that, I also have some extra bandwidth now that I didn't used to have. My nights are my nights, my weekends are my weekends. But I'm also doing quite a bit of consulting with the International Volleyball Federation, which has really been great to keep my hand in that space and help them. So I just feel extremely fortunate, as I tell people, in a profession where generally you're hired to be fired. It's nice to have an alternative.
No, I think that before,
that's
I know
awesome.
we probably have about 10, 12 minutes left. Is that good with you in terms of your schedule
Yeah,
today? Yeah,
no problem.
I just want people to know that it's because of you that we're kicking you off, not because of us.
I'm the problem.
Like, we don't want people to say these idiots had Hugh McCutcheon and they said bye. What the heck? Anyway, I did want to touch on the word trust, Hugh, because I think that you, in the book, it keeps on coming up, and I think that more coaches need to understand the value of trust and the trust that you want your players to have in you. And I specifically almost made me a little teary-eyed reading what Loy Ball said to you with regard to, because I related to this a little bit too, because I imagine I never wanted to coach my kids. When they started playing, we ran an organization that taught little kids volleyball and stuff like that, and I always said to my kids, you know what, we had other coaches to look after them because of what you said. I didn't want my kids to confuse love with dad's love with the sport, and it was always their thing, not my thing. That's sort of what I always like to tell them. So when Loy said that he was coached by his father and that he had trouble trusting other coaches, but he trusted you, you want to talk a little bit about that word trust, and maybe bring up Loy's story if you want to?
Well, yeah, I will. Before we get to that, what you're talking about with your kids is real. One of the things that I ask our kids when we're coming home from a sporting event is, do you want the dad hat or the coach hat?
Yes.
And,
I heard you say
and if
that.
they're like, hey, the coach hat, and I was like, okay, what about this? Have you thought about that? And if it's the dad hat, then cool, yeah, I love you and way to work hard. But I think that's a nice framework for maybe all parents to think about the way they want to choose to talk to their kids after or even during sporting events. But to this idea of trust, right? So in the book, I talk about 3 different types of trust. One is trust yourself. 2 is trust your teammates. And then lastly, trust your coaches. And for coaches to develop trust with athletes, they've got to be trustworthy. And that's a discussion between you and you as the coach, right? I mean, are you a person of character and integrity? You say what you do and do what you say. I think consistency is really important. Are you a credible source of knowledge and information? Do you have genuine care and concern for the people that you work with? All of that stuff. Loy, my relationship with Loy is really special to me. In that, I think here's a guy that was incredibly talented, and I think for large parts of his career, maybe was, I don't know if misunderstood, but maybe wasn't. Maybe he wasn't allowed to frame or play to his strengths. How about that? I think oftentimes people were trying to plug him into a thing that they wanted him to be. Really, for me, all I wanted him to be was the best version of himself, and find ways for him to express that in a way that felt authentic and that worked within the team structure. But I wasn't trying to turn him into anything other than him. And so to that end, we had lots of really good but honest and direct conversations about how that could happen. And it, even engaging in those kinds of conversations takes a significant amount of trust. But you got to remember, I played against Loy back in the day.
Wow.
And so there wasn't a huge age difference. So it was like we had that whole thing, which ended up being a strength, I think, as in we had this commonality, and we had some mutual respect in lots of different ways. But I think, and maybe you need to talk to him more, but I think also there was some understanding and empathy. Like I could maybe relate in ways that maybe different people couldn't have. So all that being said, he was phenomenal. And I'm so glad I got to work with him in 2000, 2008. He was obviously a huge part of our success, but at the end of it, I felt, he was able to not only reach his potential, but to show just how good he had become at the skill, at the craft of setting, and display that on the biggest stage in the world. I was just so happy for him.
And the fact that you were able to bring that out, I think after that was his fourth Olympics. Wow. That's unbelievable. Like, it's a testament.
Well, and I'd say we,
yes, I know.
I wasn't Geppetto pulling the strings.
Yeah, sorry, I know you'd hate.
No, I didn't mean it like that. I think with any of these, with all of those stories, there's athlete stories. I mean, the athletes are saying, "Hey, here's," but they're the ones that had to do the work. I was just trying to help them, maybe guide them a little bit. Just show them the way.
But it's beautiful because that was sort of like you sort of stepped out of the way a little bit and just took the pressure off him in a lot of ways. Like, remember, I think you didn't make him the captain, which was fascinating move and a brilliant move, and that one that he probably didn't expect to have the impact that it did. But I think that what that does, that helps create trust, right? When coaches worry about players and make those calls that maybe the player might not see in the short term, but kudos to him for being wise enough, experienced enough to see that.
He was awesome. Yeah, and I think we got him. We got more of Loy as a leader, as a positive influence within the team by not being a captain than I think we ever would have, having him with the bar on his jersey.
Interesting, eh?
And Tommy Hoff was phenomenal. Tommy was great in that role as well. So anyway, it all worked out.
Yeah, and Hugh, I know we're coming up on the end. Eric, we have like 6 minutes left. Do you have a question you want to ask this guy? Because this is a gem here. We can't let this go.
Oh man, I just love hearing these stories, but. No, I don't have a question. I just, I like the expression, don't get angry, get better. And
I love your Olympic quote. What's your great line about the Olympics?
Did you 4 years to be good for 2 weeks to hope to be good for the last 2 hours?
That's so good. When I heard that in your TEDx talk, I was like, did he write that? Because that was really good. So sums it up.
I do what I can.
Yeah.
I also like the let's not be curious, don't be furious. There's so much around that as to this idea of emotional control, which is also ended up being a considerable theme in the book, because going back to as Ravi Ken Ravizza would say, if you can control yourself, you can control your performance. And I think we tend to underestimate the power of self-control and emotional control. I think that idea that we can separate our emotions from our actions is a really important part of being able to achieve.
And
anyway, I digress.
We did send you 4 questions that we end shows with, but I'm gonna narrow it down to 1 because your time is valuable. So is that okay with you? Unless you had
no problem. And listen, I just offer this too. We'll do this, and if you go back, you're like, hey, that's cool. We've got a little more. We could do another time.
Okay, awesome.
Happy to have
thank you for that. That means you had a good time, I guess, right? That means that means you like us.
No, it's all good. It's easy. Yeah.
Can we get a quote of you saying that you like us?
He wants the soundbite.
That'll be the soundbite. No,
That's funny.
We'll see what we can do there.
My father never loved me, so no, I'm just kidding. The one question we'll wrap this up for you is if you could have one phrase, 'cause I think this is important for someone like you. If you could have one phrase on the back of every youth volleyball jersey around the world, or let's say U.S., Canada, North America, what would it be? What message?
Well, for youth volleyball, the T-shirt slogan would be, "Volleyball is what I do. It's not who I am." And I think for our athletes and for our parents, as we've been talking, the ability to separate their persona as a volleyball athlete from their person as, little Susie or Tommy or whoever it is, I think that's huge, because so often our athletes especially, but we've talked about this idea of parental involvement in this. They become defined by their athletic abilities and outcomes, and I think it ultimately does them, some disservice moving forward relative to, when sport's done and they actually have to get on with adulting. So, volleyball is what I do. It's not who I am. That's what I'd be feeling on the back.
Love that.
Yeah,
that is a beautiful place to end. And Hugh, I'm not going to mention your gold medal as an Olympic coach. I'm not going to mention your silver medal as an Olympic coach, because that would be telling people the wrong idea about why we're here and why we do these sports, right? Especially at youth ages. But I am going to say that you are a gold medal dad. And, I'm telling you, because I've seen that.
To be determined.
Well, throughout your career, right? Like, I mean, you stepped away from some pretty major things for your kids. And if nothing else, people should understand perspective there in what matters in this sport. Like, you could have been in the national program for years. You probably could have been there for the gold medal win on the women's side later on. And you chose your kids and family, and you're doing it again. And look, it's funny how your impact is growing the more you make that right choice. Talk about how we started. You talked about what winning means and what winning looks like. It actually is about making the right choices. That leads to the best results anyway. These people just want to win.
Well, I appreciate that. And maybe just the last thought on winning is, I say this in the book, but if it's all about winning and outcomes, then listen, if we play in an average league, then to win it, you've just got to be a little bit better than average. And I don't think any of us have signed up for the pursuit of a little bit better than average. That doesn't sound like a great life endeavor, but the idea of trying to become the best version of ourselves, trying to do the most we can with the life that we have, that's a whole different pursuit. So, let's just try and be the best we can and see what happens. We're good enough or not, but at least we know we did our best.
Amen to that. Yeah, and I think that's a great place to wrap it up, Hugh.
Well,
can't thank you enough.
If you're interested in getting back into coaching, me and my beach partner, we could use some help. So.
I'm sure. All right, send us some video. I'll give you some feedback.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll ditch your kids for some 36-year-old guy. No, Hugh, thanks so much for joining us. It's so awesome to have you. We are happy to have you be our first real remote guest, and we're talking with other people in a long line, and hopefully you can help us connect with some other people to spread the message that has a track record. At least we can put it that way.
Yeah, I know. I love it. Keep up the good work, you guys, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir. Talk soon. Okay. Cheers.
What's the big idea?